What in the world was Gríma Wormtongue's power? I have thought about this question from the moment that I saw the movies when I was in middle school. And now that I am reading Lord of the Rings for the first time in my life, which, is a shameless plug for anyone who wants to subscribe for more unorganized thoughts about my first time read for Lord of the Rings, as I'm publishing tons of videos on the channel about this, I have to say, I just got to the chapter where Gríma's power is crushed by Gandalf's, and it's one of the most fascinating depictions of magic and sorcery in the entire book so far. And I think this is what people talk about when they talk about the soft magic of J.R.R. Tolkien. Soft magic being a magic system where the rules and limitations of magic are not explicitly defined or even well understood by the reader. And this is the best example of one. But I also think another simultaneous example is the chapter when Gandalf is trying to heal Théoden from the shackles that Gríma has him in. It's in the same exact chapter as this one. And I made a whole video about that section about how it was so confusing to me. And after thinking about it for a few days, I kind of realized that my book's expectations are being screwed over by the movies. As good of movies as I think these are, I just think these books stand alone in their achievement of being absolutely brilliant and one of the greatest works of literature, not just of the 20th century, but of all time. And I want to talk about one reason in particular why I think that. It's one of the many. I talk about tons of other ones in my videos, but this one has to do with the magic system that Tolkien created and why it creates ambiguity and why that's a good thing. But just being ambiguous is no good in literature and writing. You never want to really be ambiguous. Specificity is what makes a really good writer. And Tolkien creates such a perfect specific thing in his work that I just want to gush on it for a little bit. For a few days, I've been trying to think of the term that this would classify under. And I think the first thing that I thought of and that came to mind was the idea of magical realism. Having given up on 100 Years of Solitude a decade ago, I have to say I don't really have a ton of experience with magical realism in any of my readings, but it's essentially just writing a story where you incorporate things like the ability to fly or time travel into a story and just how to integrate that without a ton of explanation. Now, I kind of think this isn't right, classifying Tolkien's work with magical realism. Like, the only part I agree with in this assessment of Tolkien being a magical realist writer is that he just doesn't explain things. And I have to say, in this section with the power of Gríma, it's not magic or sorcery as we would typically think. My reading and understanding of this is that it's just constant berating and beating down of a person with words, and therefore eventually those words become a poison to that person and hold them captive. But for Tolkien, I think he actually took this literally. And Gríma's words became a poison not just in the metaphorical way. And I know tons of people will disagree with me on this one, because you can debate a soft magical system for eons without ever really coming to a firm conclusion. But I think there is the example in this passage that I just have not been able to get out of my head. It's this incredible passage in this chapter in the King of the Golden Hall. And this is what the book says. At the king's board sat Éomer and the 4 guests. And there also, waiting upon the king, was the lady Éowyn. They ate and drank swiftly. The others were silent while Théoden questioned Gandalf concerning Saruman. How far back his treachery goes, who can guess, said Gandalf. He was not always evil. Once I do not doubt that he was the friend of Rohan, and even when his heart grew colder, he found you useful still. But for long, he has now plotted your ruin, wearing the mask of friendship until he was ready. In those years, Wormtongue's task was easy, and all that you did was swiftly known in Isengard. For your land was open, and strangers came and went, and ever Wormtongue's whispering was in your ear, poisoning your thought, chilling your heart, weakening your limbs, while others watched and could do nothing, for your will was in his keeping. But when I escaped and warned you, then the mask was torn, for those who would see. After that, Wormtongue played dangerously, always seeking to delay you, to prevent your full strength being gathered. He was crafty, dulling men's wariness, or working on their fears as served the occasion. Do you not remember how eagerly he urged that no man should be spared on a wild goose chase northward, when the immediate peril was westward? He persuaded you to forbid Éomer to pursue the raiding orcs. If Éomer had not defied Wormtongue's voice, speaking with your mouth, those orcs would have reached Isengard by now, bearing a great prize. Not indeed that prize which Saruman desires above all else, but at least 2 members of my company, sharers of a secret hope, of which even to you, Lord, I cannot yet speak openly. Dare you think of what they might now be suffering, or what Saruman now have learned to our destruction. This just feels outside the realm of normal words. So it's not magical realism because 1, this is not a normal fictional story in the real world. Although, time out, I have heard the legitimate theory that Middle Earth is actually just our Earth thousands and thousands, maybe millions of years ago. Are you kidding me? That is so cool. But anyway, it's not just like magic doesn't exist in this world and Tolkien is putting things out there without explanation. Magic seems to be known in Middle Earth. But something that's interesting is the only time I've really seen it in full effect, and I know it's been in more places than this, but magic as I understand it is Gandalf attempting to shut the door from the orcs following them, and then the Balrog using a counter curse and almost breaking Gandalf. I know it was used in the mirror and just in a few other places in the book, but that seems the hardest form of magic in this world. But in this instance, Gandalf comes ready to free Theoden from the clutches of Gríma, and I was expecting him to point a staff and heal him up just like the movies. And it didn't have that. And again, if you want, watch my ramblings of that section on the channel. But now this has me thinking the reverse. If Gandalf's power were his words, were Gríma's the same? And did Tolkien literally mean to say there's power in words? Because I'll be honest with you, that's kind of a boring idea. I think Tolkien did something more interesting and actually gave a magical system to words, so that the words spoken to Theoden by Gríma were slowly trickling into his bones and keeping him a prisoner there. And I have to say, as someone who has experienced this before, like I'm sure many of you have, this was one of the most interesting and liberating passages of a book that I have read in years. It's something that I kind of think some of the best authors in the world do. They give abstract concepts concrete symbolism. The most famous one off the top of my head is what J.K. Rowling did with the Dementors, a being that symbolized what depression felt like for her. Now, this is a brilliant device in writing because it gives the ability of someone reading to process through these things and through these emotions better because they can understand it and they can give words to it. Think of what this did for thousands of kids who perhaps felt a slow creeping depression in their lives. It gave them words to understand that they are not alone in this. But Tolkien seems to be doing something a bit more subtle than giving it an outright concrete reality. It's not like the words that Gríma are speaking are turning into a big fat amalgamous blob that Gandalf has to defeat. It's more insidious than that. It's more subtle than that. I think what Tolkien is trying to do is give legitimacy to the pain and the hurt that words have caused people who are reading this. Because I'll be honest, it's been about a week since I read this chapter, and I have not been able to stop getting it out of my head or stop thinking about it. It's consuming everything I do. I was in the grocery store the other day picking up apples, and I thought an apple was going to come flying out of the next aisle because I asked for second breakfast. And then I fell into a daze of thinking about this section with Wormtongue while I was grocery shopping. Just Tolkien alone hinting at this idea that words are like living things that went into the bones of Theoden and held him captive there is enough to show to me the legitimacy of things that I've gone through with words and how damning they've been for me. But it doesn't mean I have to conquer this weird creature through it, or learn the Expecto Patronum spell. Because to be honest, laughter and joy doesn't always combat depression. I think that's a simplistic answer that Rowling kind of gave, and that most people who are depressed would probably say is almost impossible to get to. But I will, when I get to that book, talk about how brilliant of a metaphor and concrete reality that is for depression. So hold on for another few months before I actually get to the Harry Potter books. I think the very idea that words are like a living thing that can creep into your bones and hurt you, not just metaphorically, but physically, is one of the coolest and simplest forms of magic that I've ever read in my entire life. I've read magical systems before, and even things like this. But the idea is one of the most profound and simplest, and was one of the more validating to read about. Because who among us haven't been hurt by someone's words? And who among us haven't hurt someone with our words? But I think this goes a step further, which is something that not a lot of people have maybe experienced, is the power that words can have to completely entrap and ensnare you. Someone saying words constantly to you, and you end up eventually believing the words that that person said about you in a really, really negative way. It's not just like, you believe one or two things about a person, or one or two things about you based on what a person said. This is like verbal abuse of what I'm talking about. Constant berating, constant holding you down, constantly feeding you words that keep you a prisoner in your own mind. Tolkien talking about how the power of Gríma was in his words, and his secret was in that he was so good with his words, and that his words seemed to become a magic all to themselves, and were able to keep Théoden from seeing the light of day, or hope, or feel the breeze on his face, I think is one of the best things that Tolkien wrote. And I think one of the best things that Gandalf did for him was to go send him outside and to go smell the air and to touch grass. It's often for Tolkien in nature that one can find healing, not locked in a stone prison where the poisonous words of Gríma Wormtongue are keeping you captive. Again, not metaphorically, but literally. Another proof of this idea that Wormtongue's words are actually magical and they have power to them is something that Tolkien passes off for comedy. And I want to set this up too because I love devices like this. Often they are the most evident and the most seen in children's literature. It's when a writer puts some adult jokes in there that the adults can enjoy and laugh at, and it goes right over the heads of kids. Has anyone ever read Charlotte's Web recently? Well, let me talk about the brilliance of E.B. White for a second, because this man wrote a whole book about a pig who is terrified that he is going to be slaughtered. And the whole book is funny and silly and one of the greatest bedtime stories of all time. I remember reading a chapter where Wilbur was having an existential crisis because he is going to be slaughtered, and the whole time my niece was cracking up at the jokes and was just laughing her head off, and I over there was mortified at the things that Wilbur was saying. It's an incredible writing device, and he is an incredible writer. And it is just incredible writing when you can write for two audiences like that. Another example is the show Bluey, which does this excellently. Or Sesame Street as well, which is the more common one, where there's adult jokes in these shows. Tolkien does this, and I know a few other authors who kind of do this. They kind of give nods to readers who may have experienced something brutal and difficult. Again, I keep using her as an example, but Thestrals in Harry Potter are an example of this. A blatant one, which is a creature that those who have seen death with their eyes are only able to see. So there's like a nod to the reader that shows an understanding and sympathy for those who have seen death. It's an overt analogy. I think Tolkien's is much better and much subtler. He writes a comedic scene that I initially cracked up at. But the more I have thought about this, the more I think I would have done this too, and I think that I actually have done this with stuff like this in the past. But it's the moment that Gríma spits on the ground at Théoden's feet, and then there's that one guard who gets the bucket to wash off the spit. This is all that the text says about this. One of the guards ran down the stair. Another went to the well at the foot of the terrace, and in his helm drew water. With it, he washed clean the stones that Wormtongue had defiled. Now, initially, I thought this was just a funny take on something. But the more I read this and reflected on it, the more I think that I actually would have done this too. And that I actually think I have done this in the past. Wash the very spit stains out of the rock because there is power even in the saliva of this worm. And to me, this feels like Tolkien's nod to the reader that this guard thinks there is a damning magical power to these words, and so he washed them clean off the very rock. And Tolkien is showing, to me, that people's words that have caused me pain can also be like that. They can stick around. And it actually takes work to attempt to wash them away. So in something that is played for comedy, to people who have had words crush them and hurt them or poison and imprison them, this is all too real. And they would be that person grabbing the bucket, trying to wash the very spit of that person out of the rock, because they don't want that spit to just even be there. It's like you washing that out of the rock, because it's washing the idea that they are not holding you captive any longer and they cannot do this. And I know I'm all over the place with this essay, but I just think this is one of those that hit kind of close to home for me. And I don't want to go into all the personal details of my life with this one, but suffice it to say that I think the magical elements in this are just simple things in this story that are incredible in their indication that Tolkien knew the power of words so well that he made a metaphor a concrete reality and gave words the power to actually hurt people and keep them down, not just in magical incantations, but in the actual words that Gríma have said that became magic unto themselves. It's like one of the best metaphors I can find. It's just like something that's just left out for too long and it kind of grows mold or it grows like spores and it just infests and it gets worse and worse and worse and festers. I think this is beyond brilliant. It's so simple too. And it gives me hope knowing that Tolkien seemed to understand this. It makes me feel less alone. And I'm sure I'm not alone on that feeling too. So let me know if you understand this section in the same way or even a different way too, because I'd love to hear your stories about this one. So let me know in the comments below what you think of this section of Lord of the Rings, and I will see you in the next one.